Avec l'inside doc de Incarceration Nation avec l'intervenant Dean Gibson et à la modération Heirani SOTER. Heirani, c'est à toi.
Merci de me laisser la parole. Donc on part pour le dernier Inside Doc, je crois, qui est programmé aujourd'hui et qui était programmé tout au long de ce FIFO. Donc notre intervenant présente donc son film Incarceration Nation. Et du coup, je vais juste te demander de te présenter. Est-ce que tu as déjà des œuvres antérieures et de nous parler un petit peu de ton parcours jusqu'à la production de ce film?
Good morning. Firstly, I want to echo what Tom said. It's a privilege to be here and to meet people and see this beautiful land and waters and sky and ocean. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honour. And I thank the organisers from FIFO for bringing me out and screening Incarceration Nation, my film. And it's been fantastic to see the 20-year celebrations and all the celebration of 20 years of FIFO, and I wish it another 20 great, wonderful years. My name is Dean, and I'm the writer-director of Incarceration Nation. It's a film that was probably about 4 years in the making, and but my career precedes that. I've sort of been making films for almost 20 years now, and I'm an Aboriginal film. Oh yeah, there we go. Aboriginal filmmaker, and work across a range of different genres, both documentary, but I've also done a bit of kids television, a little bit of drama, and some sports stuff. So, but it's Incarceration Nation was probably my biggest film that I've been part of, and probably the hardest film to make, just given the content and the type of material that we worked with, and I guess the trauma that's wrapped up in that kind of film. And that's not just what you see, but it's the felt trauma and the intergenerational trauma that exists through my families and our families and the people who were part of making that film and the people who were telling that story. So it was a really tough one to make, but I'm really proud of what we did in making Incarceration Nation, and I think it's such a big topic in Australia. It's not addressed in the mainstream in any meaningful manner. And what I was aiming to do, and I guess we can talk a bit more about that, what I was hoping to do was really take it on with a real vigour and don't be shy. And I think sort of Tom was talking about truth-telling. And it's very much an important phase, I guess, of where we are as a nation coming forward now. And it's critical for us as a nation if we're going to mature and grow. And I think this film, like many others, are going to play an important role. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's been nice to hear people talking who have watched the film and recognise the similarities amongst stories through the Pacific. It's common themes that lay there, and also sort of the common engagements with the justice system also exist within the Pacific. So it's been good to hear those stories as well.
C'est quand même, comme tu disais, un documentaire difficile sur ce qu'il traite et qui quand même met en avant une facette pas très agréable de l'image des autorités, enfin pas de tout le monde bien sûr, à prendre bien sûr avec des pincettes, mais d'une facette des autorités australiennes. Est-ce que ça t'a pas valu d'avoir quand même des petits coups de pression, des problèmes derrière de produire ce film avec le gouvernement ou les autorités?
That question gets asked a lot, but what we tried to do was give ourselves a little bit of distance from the authorities to tell the story with a lot of freedom. If we tried to begin to embed ourselves into the prison system or try to get permissions to do things from the big entities, we'd we knew we would get, and we were kind of seeing that we would get roadblocks, and we decided that we could tell the story from a different perspective. And in saying that, it took about 7 or 8 attempts to write the film from different perspectives and try and approach it from a different way. And the irony was I came back full circle and came back to the original idea of telling it through families who were affected. And we knew that that was our pathway, where firstly it's the authentic Aboriginal voice on screen, their perspective, their truth, their authenticity, and then in doing so, we had the ability to tell it from that perspective and not have to allow permissions from departments and government authorities. And admittedly, when we did our first cut of the film, we got notes from the lawyers at SBS, and we were on a Zoom call. They looked at me on the thing and said, "This is, in all my years of working at SBS, this is my biggest set of notes." And she had this Excel sheet with about 300 lines of comments, and it was really interesting. I mean, it was frustrating to deal with lawyers, but it was an interesting exercise to come back on their points and go, well, here's our referencing, or here's our pointing to where our source material is. And they were blown away. And even the because it was such a controversial film for SBS, it went to the boss at SBS, and he had some concerns, and we spoke, and I said, when I showed him that this stuff is real and it's true, he like many other Australians couldn't believe it. And I think that's what I wanted to show, particularly telling that backstory. I think is that the backstory really set up the fact that people, the average Australian, would go, "That we wouldn't do that, would we? That wouldn't come from that's not the way we do things in Australia." But what we quickly showed is that the fact that clear steps of policy, law, legislation, and attitudes had driven lots of Aboriginal people down a particular trajectory, a particular road. And once they were down that road, it's hard to get off that road. And part of that road was the idea of being removed, displaced, murdered off your country early on, or displaced off your land, moved to areas which is not, you're unfamiliar with. It's new areas, you don't know that country or those people, and you can't create wealth, you can't get an education, you can't get basic health care. All these factors that quickly put you right back there when the starting line's here, all these factors suddenly drop you right back at beyond the start line. And then we expect people to then come to the table in society and feel like that it's okay and that they'll do okay, and they're not coming with this 4 generations of trauma that sit around that, or heartache or pain or displacement. So I think that was another big point that we sort of wanted to make in the film, is that idea that we can tell all these things from the lived experience, and that was going to be a much richer, truer, authentic story than having to deal with people who make policy or law or institution owners or private jail. We could just tell, in many ways, we felt that the story would have a stronger impact or stronger truth or authenticity from a lived experience, and particularly from the Aboriginal perspective.
Dans le documentaire, on est quand même confronté à des moments très difficiles, avec de l'humiliation et de la maltraitance d'adolescents ou de jeunes adultes. On a affaire aussi, je crois, à un passage où une mère est mise en garde à vue, et elle fait une crise pendant qu'elle est en garde à vue et elle décède du coup. Est-ce que ça n'a pas été déjà très difficile de récolter les témoignages des familles vis-à-vis de ça? Et toi, en tant que réalisateur et même les équipes du film, comment vous avez réagi à ces vérités peut-être auxquelles que vous n'envisagiez peut-être pas aussi fortes au moment d'entamer le tournage?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess firstly, let's talk about the families affected. So the people who appear in that vision, and the police cells and the prison cells, and on the streets being tackled by the police, and all those kind of things. Everyone who we show in the film, so every bit of footage that you see from police vests and buildings and all that sort of stuff, we made a concerted effort to contact every family, and we wanted to do that. We wanted to make sure that every family that saw this documentary knew what it was about and knew that what we were trying to achieve and what we were doing. And we reached out to over 100 families who we show in the documentary, and we spent hours and hours and hours just talking to them. And this game is making documentaries is all about trust, and we made sure that we took our time through the production to just sit and listen to these stories. And we could listen to a story from the Kimberley, Northwest, or country Victoria, or Sydney, or North Queensland. All these stories, and we took time to listen to these stories, and we sent people out all across the countryside to find the families, to give us the permission to use the footage, because it's their families are on screen suffering, and it's their families who are watching it who are going to have to relive that. And we knew that came with a toll, and they had to prepare for that. But I can tell you the overwhelming, and I think there might have been a couple of families who said no, so we didn't include theirs, but the overwhelming consensus to us was use the footage, tell, you have our blessing, tell the story you need to tell it the way you need to tell it, and do it with our absolute support, because all these families across Australia are tired, and they are sick and tired, and they are frustrated with this system, and they don't want this to happen to their families anymore. Their neighbours' families, their younger kids growing up, they want to do their best with what they have now to say, you know what, this is enough. We're going to speak up, we're going to find our voice, and we're going to work through what we have to work through, but we're going to include and be part of this. If you want us to be part of it, we will be part of it, to find our voice and to be part of the message, to say enough is enough. And I was blown away by that. And in many ways people say, well, why did you make the film? What was the driver and the motivator? And quite simply, in many ways, it's those stories, it's those families and those people who had that story, who in the past may have felt voiceless or not supported or not listened to. And to have those families come and give us such support and enthusiasm to make this, and encouragement, knowing that it was going to be hard, and that was the other factor. And this is a really important point, I think, for filmmakers who are watching this, is that NITV and SBS made a really big point in our budget, in production, in pre-production, and they said to us, and very early on, the big bosses said to me, include a line of budget that allows for counselling and support for your staff, for the crew, for researchers, for editors, for myself, for our producer, all that sort of stuff. There was no hesitation whatsoever, and they made it really clear, and that was a really important part of making the film, knowing that we were going to be sitting in an edit suite for 20 weeks watching this vision over and over and over and over. And I mean, our editor Lindy, she worked hard and she was an absolute champion. But because she didn't have the luxury to walk away from it, I could spend some hours and step out and give her some time to do her own thing. But it was a really important thing, actually, and it was important for us all to use that service and make use of it. And I think it's still taken a while since making the film to find my own energy and pick up after because it was hard going, and it took its toll in some form too. But it was worth it, you know, and that's the big thing. It says it was worth it. Of course, it was worth it. And what would the impact be? Are you changing in many ways, for me, it was just my job at that time was to make the best film which I could with what I had at my disposal, and tell the story as best as I could in that authentic manner. And that's what I hope to achieve.
Je pense qu'on est clairement... je pense que c'est réussi de ce point de vue-là. Parce que on se retrouve, en tout cas nous en tant que spectateurs, devant des chiffres effarants en fait. Au final, moi personnellement, même si on est un peu conscient de la situation, on se rend pas compte à quel point c'est dramatique au niveau de la loi, des lois bafouées au final vis-à-vis des Aborigènes. Et du coup, c'est assez déstabilisant. Donc c'est un pas. J'espère que c'est un pas vers une prise de conscience vis-à-vis de ça. Est-ce que du coup tu commences cette facette de ton combat? Est-ce que tu es disposé à continuer à produire des choses pour sensibiliser pas forcément sur le sujet forcément de la prison, mais du cas des Aborigènes?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, I think sort of Tom alluded to, we've got a constitutional vote this year. And that's one step that will get us to a treaty at some stage. I would hope, and it's one step of getting a level of a change of heart from the nation. I think that's the big one for Australia. And again, I only speak from my own lived experience, and what I see when I travel around Australia is that there are still a lot of people who don't understand the Aboriginal history or the Aboriginal story of Australia. And I think as a filmmaker, that's a clear directive for me to play a role in that. And it might it might not be hard-hitting films on every occasion, and we can always do the Trojan horse thing by creating different types of content that will turn hearts, change minds, open ears. So I guess, yeah, it is something I love doing, and I guess for me too, I'm learning, and it's kind of the approach I've started to take in my career. Is I don't have to go into a film knowing everything, and in fact, I don't want to. I like the idea of going in quite raw and quite new, and learning, going on a journey in making the film to actually learn and understand the world or the content or the character. That doesn't frighten me. That used to frighten me, but that doesn't frighten me anymore. That's actually, I find that quite liberating and exciting on some levels. So I think, yeah, absolutely, still be part of that, and I think, I hope over time I think I'm 47 years old, and I'd love to think there's a crop of young Aboriginal First Nation filmmakers that are making their way around behind to try and keep working the ground that we've tried to break in front of them. So that's another thing that I hope for.
Du coup, je vais juste laisser un laps de temps pour des questions du public, si potentiellement il y en a. Est-ce que quelqu'un voudrait intervenir avant que je donne le mot de la fin à Dean pour ce Inside the Doc? Non? Parce qu'en plus, on va enchaîner de toute façon sur une problématique autour des Aborigènes aussi après. Alors, du coup, est-ce que tu as un mot à ajouter Ah, si, il y a une question. Wallace. Voilà.
Et juste, je voulais demander à Dean si le film a été bien diffusé en Australie sur les grandes chaînes australiennes.
Yes, it was broadcast both on SBS and NITV, and it's been on that SBS on demand for a good year. And it was interesting how it was received. Like it certainly struck a conversation around the media outlets a little bit. It got some big headlines. There's a few talk shows on the big networks that spoke to it in the conversations. It sort of peaked quite highly on Twitter. But like everything, it takes the time and the work, the hard work, comes behind those initial conversations. And I think that's the challenge now is, and it touches back to impact and what role can I do in that? And in many ways, for me, it was about making the best film I could make, and then people who work. I've had a lot of people who work in government and all across institutions at a state and federal level talk to me and said they've seen the film, which is great. And they absolutely understood it, and they were inspired by it. But like, as you know, it requires the next step. And until things begin to change at the policy levels and the decision-making power levels. And one great point, there's a Tila, she's a lawyer in Sydney, she's in the film. And I was doing an interview with her before to prepare, and I said to her, it's so complex, how can you even, it seems too big to deal with, how can you deal with that? And she said, I'm so tired of people saying it's complex. It's not complex. It's not complex. I said, what do you mean? She goes, it's just a power, all it requires is a power shift. Once you get the power shift, the dominoes will fall. And it's that first acknowledgement that there needs to be a power shift that requires local power, First Nation, Aboriginal power in around the decision making and the choices being made across all those institutions and laws. And that's why we wanted to make sure that the vast majority of the voices in our film were First Nation families, obviously, who were affected, but also lawyers and ex-police, policy people who are sort of shifting that seismic shift around power, so that we can get that sort of flip that pendulum.
Du coup, qu'est-ce que tu pourrais dire pour motiver au final nos spectateurs à jeter un coup d'œil à ton film, et quelle est la portée du message que tu veux leur faire passer par son biais?
I guess finally, thank you for supporting the film at FIFO. Thank you for being here today. And I guess all I can hope for is that you can listen to it, you can have conversations around your kitchen tables, around your sports clubs or sports teams, or around all those big things in life that we have, family, friends, workplaces, that you can begin to have those conversations about this topic and this film and films like this film. And that through that, people listen. I think that's what I hope for the most, is that people just come in with a clear conscience and a clear heart and just listen to the story and understand, with an empathetic understanding around where we've come from, where we are today, and where we hope to go. And I guess for everyone here today, that's all I could hope for. Thank you.
Merci pour ton intervention, merci pour ce film qui est en compétition du coup cette année, un film qui très fort avec, comme je disais, des chiffres très importants, un devoir très important vis-à-vis de ce qui se passe en Australie, vis-à-vis des Aborigènes et des centres pénitentiaires. Donc voilà, vous pouvez toujours le consulter en ligne jusqu'au 19 février, je crois, même si d'ici là, le FIFO va bientôt terminer, il y aura toujours possibilité de le voir. Donc n'hésitez pas à aller le découvrir sur le net.